In the heart of a lively, bustling city filled with tall buildings and busy streets, Marcus Thompson was just another face in the crowd. A hard-working man in his early 30s, Marcus had spent most of his life juggling responsibilities. As a single father raising an energetic 8-year-old son, he knew what it meant to put others first. His days were long, starting at dawn when he left for his primary job as a warehouse supervisor and ending late into the night after finishing shifts at a local diner. Despite the exhaustion that often weighed him down, Marcus always carried a quiet sense of pride. He was determined to give his son, Jamal, the kind of life he deserved, one full of love, stability, and opportunities. On this particular evening, Marcus found himself trudging home after yet another double shift. His feet ached from standing all day, and his shoulders felt heavy under the weight of 2 bulging grocery bags. Inside those bags were essentials: fresh fruits, vegetables, eggs, milk, and even a small treat, a chocolate cake for Jamal's upcoming soccer game victory celebration. Marcus smiled faintly as he thought about how excited his son would be when he saw the dessert. It wasn't much, but it was something special they could share together. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over the city skyline. Streetlights flickered on one by one, illuminating the sidewalks where people hurried along, eager to get home. Marcus adjusted the strap of his backpack and glanced at his phone. The bus was running 5 minutes late, which meant he'd have to rush once he finally boarded if he wanted to make it to Jamal's game on time. Still, he tried not to let the delay bother him. Patience was something he'd learned to cultivate over the years, especially living in a city where things rarely went according to plan. As Marcus stood near the curb, waiting for the bus, a sleek black car pulled up beside him. At first glance, it looked like any other vehicle cruising through the neighborhood, but something about its sudden stop caught Marcus's attention. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside, and there were no markings on the exterior to indicate who or what it belonged to. Curiosity piqued. Marcus took a step back, creating some distance between himself and the car. He didn't want to seem suspicious, but years of living in the city had taught him to trust his instincts. Moments later, the driver's door opened and out stepped Officer Daniel Grayson. Dressed in plain clothes, Grayson exuded an air of authority that made heads turn. His sharp jawline and piercing gaze gave him an intimidating presence, while his posture suggested someone accustomed to command. Known around the precinct for his brash personality and questionable behavior, Grayson had earned a reputation as one of the more controversial figures in law enforcement. Some praised his dedication to cleaning up the streets. Others whispered behind closed doors about his tendency to cross ethical lines. Grayson strode toward Marcus without hesitation, his boots clicking against the pavement. "Hey, you," he barked, his voice cutting through the hum of traffic and distant chatter. "What are you doing here?" Marcus blinked, taken aback by the abruptness of the question. I'm just waiting for the bus," he replied, keeping his tone polite despite feeling uneasy. "Is there a problem?" Ignoring Marcus's response, Grayson narrowed his eyes and scanned the area around them. "This isn't your neighborhood, is it?" he asked accusingly, though it sounded more like a statement than a genuine inquiry. "Actually, it is," Marcus said firmly, meeting Grayson's gaze. "I live a few blocks away." Grayson scoffed, clearly unconvinced. "Yeah, right. People, like you don't belong around here." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus stiffened, his grip tightening around the grocery bags. He wasn't sure whether to argue or walk away. Either option seemed risky given the situation. "You, got ID on you?" Grayson demanded, taking another step closer. His hand hovered near the holster on his hip, a subtle but unmistakable show of force. "I don't need to show you anything," Marcus replied evenly, trying to keep his frustration in check. "I haven't done anything wrong." Grayson smirked, leaning in slightly. "That's funny, because these groceries look mighty expensive for someone like you. Where'd you get the money for all this?" The accusation stung, but Marcus refused to rise to the bait. Instead, he shifted his stance. placing one foot slightly behind the other in case he needed to move quickly. "I work 2 jobs to provide for my family," he explained, his voice steady despite the tension building inside him. "Everything I have, I earned honestly." But Grayson wasn't listening. His focus had shifted to the grocery bags dangling from Marcus's arms. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he reached out and snatched one of them before Marcus could react. "Let's see what we've got here," Grayson muttered, peering inside. Before Marcus could protest, the officer dumped the contents onto the ground without warning. Fruits rolled across the sidewalk, bruising as they collided with cracks in the pavement. Eggs cracked open, their yolks spreading like golden puddles. The carton of juice burst upon impact, staining everything it touched. For a moment, Marcus simply stared, unable to process what had just happened. All the effort he'd put into shopping, carrying, and saving for these items now lay wasted at his feet. "That's enough," Marcus exclaimed, his voice rising despite his best efforts to remain calm. "Why did you do that? What gives you the right?" Grayson sneered, clearly enjoying the reaction he'd provoked. "You think you're better than me?" he spat, stepping closer until they were almost nose to nose. "People like you always act so high and mighty, but deep down, you're nothing." Marcus clenched his fists, every fiber of his being screaming to fight back. But he knew better. Getting into a physical altercation with a police officer, even one behaving irrationally, would only escalate the situation. So instead, he took a deep breath and forced himself to speak slowly, enunciating each word. "I haven't done anything to deserve this treatment. If you have a legitimate reason to stop me, fine, but this," he gestured toward the ruined groceries, "this is unacceptable." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Pedestrians slowed their pace or stopped altogether, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Some whispered among themselves, while others pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Among them was Sarah Collins, a journalist who happened to be passing by. She recognized the gravity of the moment immediately and began filming discreetly, knowing that moments like this could shine a light on systemic issues, plaguing communities like hers. As the tension continued to mount, everyone present held their breath, unsure of what might happen next. Would Marcus stand his ground? Would Grayson back down? Or would the confrontation spiral further out of control? One thing was certain. Whatever transpired in the coming minutes would leave a lasting impression, not only on Marcus and Grayson, but also on everyone watching. As Marcus stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The spilled groceries lay scattered across the sidewalk, a stark reminder of the injustice he was facing. Each bruised apple and cracked egg felt like a personal attack, not just on him but on everything he worked so hard for. His mind raced with questions. Why was this happening? What had he done to deserve such treatment? And most importantly, how could he possibly resolve this situation without making it worse? Officer Grayson, however, showed no signs of remorse or hesitation. Instead, he leaned closer, his face twisted into a smug grin that sent chills down Marcus's spine. "You think you're some kind of saint?" Grayson sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Walking around with your fancy groceries, acting like you own the place. People like you don't know your place." Marcus swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay composed despite the rising anger bubbling inside him. He knew responding impulsively would only give Grayson more ammunition to use against him. Still, the urge to defend himself burned fiercely. Taking a deep breath, Marcus straightened up as much as he could while still holding on to the remaining grocery bag. "I'm not trying to act like anything," he said firmly, locking eyes with Grayson. "I'm just standing here, minding my own business, waiting for the bus. That's all." Grayson let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head as if Marcus's words were absurd. "Minding your own business? Yeah, right, we both know that's not true." He gestured vaguely toward the crowd that had gathered, his tone laced with disdain. "Look at you, trying to play the victim, always playing the victim." The accusation stung deeply, but Marcus refused to let it break him. He glanced briefly, At the growing number of bystanders watching silently, their phones raised to capture the moment. For a split second, he wondered if anyone would step forward to intervene. Would someone speak up and tell Grayson that he was overstepping? Or would they simply stand by, content to watch the drama unfold from a safe distance? Before Marcus could dwell on those thoughts further, Grayson took another aggressive step forward, closing the gap between them until they were nearly toe-to-toe. "Let me tell you something," Grayson growled, jabbing a finger inches away from Marcus's face. "If I wanted to, I could make your life hell right now. One wrong move and you'll be spending tonight in handcuffs instead of going home to your kid." The threat hung heavily in the air, sending a shiver through Marcus's body. He couldn't deny the fear creeping into his mind, the fear of being arrested unfairly, of missing Jamal's soccer game, of failing as a father because of someone else's cruelty. But even as doubt crept in, Marcus reminded himself of who he was and what he stood for. He wasn't going to let Grayson intimidate him into submission. "I haven't done anything wrong," Marcus repeated, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "And you know it. If you have a legitimate reason to accuse me of something, then do it. Otherwise, leave me alone." Grayson's expression darkened at Marcus's defiance. Clearly, he hadn't expected his target to push back so calmly. For a moment, he hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the crowd before returning to Marcus. Then, with a sudden burst of frustration, he reached out and shoved Marcus backward, causing him to stumble onto the edge of the street. The force of the shove caught Marcus off guard, sending him sprawling awkwardly. Instinctively, he dropped the remaining grocery bag to catch himself, its contents spilling out alongside the rest of his ruined items. Apples rolled into the gutter, bottles of juice toppled over, and packets of bread flattened underfoot. The sight was devastating, not just because of the wasted food, but because it symbolized everything Marcus had been working toward. Every dollar he earned, every hour he sacrificed, every ounce of effort he poured into providing for his family now seemed meaningless in the face of Grayson's unchecked power. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as people witnessed the shove. Some muttered angrily under their breath while others shouted objections loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, that's unnecessary," one man yelled, stepping forward slightly before hesitating. "He didn't do anything." Grayson whipped around, glaring daggers at the man who dared challenge him. "Stay out of this unless you want trouble too," he snapped, his hand hovering near his holster once again. The warning silenced the man instantly, though his fists remained clenched in frustration. Among the onlookers, Sarah Collins continued recording the scene, her hands trembling slightly as she zoomed in on Marcus struggling to regain his footing. She had seen enough interactions like this one to recognize the pattern, a pattern of abuse masked by authority. Her heart ached for Marcus, knowing firsthand how difficult it was to stand up to someone like Grayson. But she also felt a flicker of hope. With her camera rolling, she might finally have the evidence needed to hold him accountable. Meanwhile, Marcus slowly climbed back onto the sidewalk, brushing dirt off his palms and knees. His pride was wounded, but he refused to let Grayson see how shaken he truly was. Straightening his posture, he looked directly at the officer, his jaw set in determination. "Is this really how you treat people?" he asked, his voice low but filled with quiet strength. "Is this how you serve and protect?" Grayson's lips curled into a sneer, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Perhaps he realized he'd gone too far, or perhaps he simply didn't care anymore. Either way, he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glared at Marcus for a long moment before turning his attention to the crowd. "Show's over, folks," he barked, waving dismissively at the spectators. "Move along before I start handing out tickets." But no one moved. The crowd remained rooted in place, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outrage. Some continued filming, capturing every detail of the confrontation. Others exchanged worried glances, whispering about whether they should call for backup or try to intervene themselves. Despite Grayson's attempts to assert control, it was clear that he had lost whatever semblance of authority he'd initially held. For Marcus, the moment stretched on endlessly. Though physically unharmed beyond a few scrapes, he felt emotionally drained. The weight of the encounter pressed down on him, threatening to crush the resilience he'd built over years of hardship. Yet amidst the chaos, he found solace in one undeniable truth. He hadn't backed down. Even when faced with overwhelming odds, he had stood firm, refusing to let Grayson strip him of his dignity. As the standoff lingered, Sarah quietly stepped forward, lowering her phone momentarily to address Grayson. "Sir," she said cautiously, her voice calm but firm, "I think it's important that we document situations like this. Transparency is key to accountability. Don't you agree?" Grayson's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Who are you?" he demanded, taking a step in her direction. "Another busybody sticking your nose where it doesn't belong?" Sarah didn't flinch. "My name is Sarah Collins, and I'm a journalist. I'm here to report the truth. Not rumors, not speculation, but facts. And what I'm witnessing right now deserves to be shared." The tension escalated further as Grayson processed her words. For a brief moment it seemed like he might lash out again, either verbally or physically. But then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders sagged, as if the weight of his actions finally hit him. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stalked back to his car, slamming the door shut behind him. The engine roared to life, and within seconds the vehicle sped off into the night, leaving behind a trail of dust and unanswered questions. As the sound of the retreating car faded, the crowd erupted into murmurs of relief and disbelief. Some approached Marcus, offering words of encouragement or helping him gather the remnants of his groceries. Others lingered nearby, discussing what they had just witnessed and wondering what came next. For Marcus, the aftermath of the confrontation was bittersweet. On one hand, he felt a sense of vindication knowing that he hadn't cowered in the face of injustice. On the other hand, the damage done to his belongings, his peace of mind, and his faith in law enforcement was undeniable. Little did he know, however, that this incident was far from over. The footage captured by Sarah would soon ignite a firestorm of public outrage, shining a spotlight not only on Grayson's actions, but on the broader issues plaguing communities like Marcus's. And in doing so, it would set the stage for a fight, much larger than any single individual, a fight for justice, accountability, and change. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself surrounded by a mix of concerned strangers and curious onlookers. Some offered sympathetic smiles, while others muttered words of encouragement under their breath. A young woman knelt beside him, gently picking up a bruised apple from the ground. "Here," she said softly, handing it to him. "At least take this. It's the least we can do." Marcus accepted the gesture with a nod, though his mind was elsewhere. The weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't just upset about the groceries, though that loss stung deeply, but about the sheer unfairness of it all. How could someone in a position of authority act so recklessly, so cruelly? And why did it always seem like people who looked like him bore the brunt of such treatment? Sarah Collins, still holding her phone, approached Marcus cautiously. She had stopped recording for now, sensing that the moment called for human connection rather than documentation. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice warm but tinged with concern. Marcus hesitated before answering. His initial instinct was to brush off the question, to put on a brave face and insist he was fine. But something about Sarah's demeanor made him pause. There was no judgment in her eyes, only genuine empathy. Taking a deep breath, he shook, his head slightly. "No," he admitted quietly. "I'm not okay. None of this is okay." Sarah nodded as if she understood exactly what he meant. "I know," she replied. "And I want you to know that what happened here tonight wasn't your fault. You didn't deserve any of this." Her words struck a chord deep within Marcus. For days, weeks, even years, he'd carried the burden of similar encounters silently, telling himself that speaking up wouldn't change anything. But standing there amidst the scattered remnants of his groceries, surrounded by people who seemed to care, he felt a flicker of hope, a possibility that maybe, just maybe, things could be different this time. "I recorded everything, Sarah." continued, gesturing toward her phone. "If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to share the video. It's important for people to see what really happened here tonight." Marcus frowned, considering her proposal. On one hand, the idea of reliving the confrontation through a video felt daunting. He already knew how exhausting it could be to recount painful experiences, especially when they involved systemic issues that often went ignored. On the other hand, he couldn't deny the power of visibility. If sharing the footage meant shining a light on the kind of injustice he and countless others face daily, then perhaps it was worth it. "Do you think it will make a difference?" Marcus asked finally, his voice tinged with skepticism. "People post videos like this all the time and nothing ever changes." Sarah sighed, acknowledging the truth in his statement. "You're right. It doesn't always lead to immediate change. But sometimes it plants a seed. Maybe this time enough people will see it and demand accountability. Maybe this time we can push for something bigger." The sincerity in her voice gave Marcus pause. He glanced around at the lingering crowd, noticing the way some were still talking animatedly about what they'd witnessed. A few had pulled out their own phones, likely sharing snippets of the incident online. The ripple effect was already beginning, spreading outward like waves in a pond. "Okay," Marcus said after a long moment. "If you think it'll help, then go ahead. Just let me know if anything comes of it." Sarah smiled, a look of gratitude crossing her face. "Thank you," she said earnestly. "This isn't just about you or me. It's about everyone who's been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. Your story matters, Marcus. It deserves to be heard." With that, she stepped aside, pulling out her laptop from her bag to begin editing the footage. As she worked, Marcus sat on a nearby bench, staring blankly at the cracked screen of his phone. His thoughts drifted to Jamal, waiting at home for him. What would he tell his son when he walked through the door empty-handed? How could he explain why dinner was ruined and why Daddy seemed so distant tonight? Before long, Sarah returned, her expression a mix of excitement and determination. "I've uploaded the video," she announced. "It's live now. I titled it, 'Racist Cop Destroys Innocent Man's Groceries.' Hopefully it catches people's attention." Within minutes, the impact became undeniable. Notifications began flooding Sarah's phone, alerting her to comments, shares, and reactions pouring in from across social media platforms. At first, it was just a trickle, a few outraged messages from local residents expressing solidarity with Marcus. But soon the trickle turned into a flood, with users tagging news outlets, activists, and community leaders in hopes of amplifying the message. By midnight, the video had gone viral, racking up thousands of views and sparking heated discussions online. Hashtags like Justice for Marcus and Accountability Now trended on Twitter, drawing attention not only to the specific incident, but also to broader issues of racial profiling and police misconduct. People shared personal stories of similar run-ins with law enforcement, creating a chorus of voices demanding reform. Back at the precinct, Officer Grayson remained oblivious to the storm brewing around him. After speeding away from the scene, earlier that evening, he had returned to his apartment convinced that the altercation would blow over without consequence. He'd dealt with difficult situations before, and each time, his badge had shielded him from repercussions. Why should this time be any different? But Grayson's confidence began to waver the following morning when he arrived at work. As he entered the station, he noticed an unusual tension in the air. Officers whispered among themselves, casting furtive glances in his direction. When he reached his desk, he found a sticky note attached to his monitor. "Chief wants to see you." ASAP, Grayson's stomach dropped. Though he tried to maintain his usual bravado, unease gnawed at him as he made his way to Chief Martinez's office. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear muffled voices inside. Pushing it open, he stepped in to find Martinez seated behind his desk, flanked by two internal affairs investigators. Their stern expressions told him everything he needed to know. "Officer Grayson," Martinez began, his tone clipped and uncharacteristically cold. "We need to talk about an incident last night involving a civilian named Marcus Thompson. Have a seat." Grayson obeyed reluctantly, sinking into the chair opposite the chief. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what might have gone wrong. Surely, word of the confrontation hadn't traveled beyond the handful of witnesses present. Or had it? Martinez slid a printed screenshot of Sarah's video across the desk. "This surfaced online late last night," he explained. "It's been viewed millions of times and the public is calling for answers. Care to explain yourself?" Grayson stared at the image, his chest tightening as he recognized the scene captured on camera. The spilled groceries, the shove, the sneering remarks. It was all there, immortalized in high-definition clarity. For the first time in his career, he felt truly cornered. "I was doing my job," Grayson protested weakly, though even he could hear the lack of conviction in his voice. "The guy was loitering suspiciously. I had every right to question him." Martinez raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Loitering? That's not what the video shows. What it does show is you harassing an innocent man, destroying his property, and escalating the situation unnecessarily. Do you realize the damage this has done? Not just to your reputation, but to the entire department?" Grayson opened his mouth to respond, but quickly closed it again. There was no defense he could offer that wouldn't sound hollow or self-serving. Instead, he slumped back in his chair, defeated. Meanwhile, outside the precinct, protesters began, gathering in growing numbers. Armed with signs reading "Enough is enough" and "Hold them accountable," they chanted slogans and demanded justice for Marcus. Community leaders addressed the crowd, urging them to channel their anger into constructive action. Petitions circulated rapidly, collecting signatures from residents determined to see Grayson removed from his position. Inside the station, the pressure mounted. Calls poured in from city officials, civil rights organizations, and ordinary citizens alike, all demanding swift action. Internal Affairs launched a formal investigation, reviewing body cam footage or lack thereof, interviewing witnesses, and poring over Grayson's disciplinary record. Patterns emerged: complaints of excessive force, derogatory language, and racially motivated behavior, all pointing to a disturbing history of misconduct. For Marcus, the sudden influx of attention was overwhelming. Journalists reached out seeking interviews, activists invited him to speak at rallies, and strangers sent messages of support via social media. While grateful for the solidarity, he struggled to balance the newfound spotlight with his responsibilities as a father and provider. Jamal, sensing his dad's stress, hugged him tightly one evening and whispered, "Don't worry, Daddy. We'll get through this together." Those simple words reminded Marcus why he had agreed to let Sarah share the video in the first place. It wasn't just about seeking justice for himself. It was about paving the way for a better future, for Jamal, for their community, and for anyone else who might find themselves in a similar situation. As the days passed, momentum continued to build. The viral video became a catalyst for larger conversations about policing, accountability, and systemic racism. Schools held assemblies to discuss the importance of standing up against. The days following the viral video felt like a whirlwind for Marcus. What had started as an ordinary evening waiting for the bus had transformed into a national conversation about accountability, justice, and systemic racism. The attention was overwhelming at times. Journalists calling nonstop, news vans parked outside his apartment building, strangers stopping him on the street to shake his hand or offer words of encouragement. But despite the chaos, Marcus couldn't ignore the sense of purpose growing within him. He realized that his story wasn't just about one bad encounter with a police officer. It was about exposing patterns of behavior that affected countless others. As protests continued to grow in size and intensity, Marcus found himself drawn into the movement. Activists invited him to speak at rallies, where crowds gathered to demand reforms in policing practices. At first, he hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something he'd ever imagined doing. He'd spent most of his life working quietly behind the scenes, keeping his head down and focusing on providing for his family. But as he stood before the sea of faces chanting his name, holding signs that read, "Justice for Marcus," and "No more excuses," he felt a surge of responsibility. If not him, then who? Who else could put a face to the issue and remind people that these weren't abstract problems? They were real-life struggles faced by real people. At one particularly powerful rally, Marcus took the microphone, his voice trembling slightly as he began to speak. "I didn't ask for any of this," he admitted, glancing out at the crowd. "All I wanted was to get home to my son, to make sure we had food on the table and a roof over our heads. But what happened? To me that night, it wasn't just about spilled groceries, it was about disrespect, it was about power. And it was about someone thinking they could treat me like I didn't matter because of the color of my skin." The crowd erupted in cheers, their energy lifting Marcus's spirits. For the first time in days, he felt less alone. These strangers, people from all walks of life, were standing with him, united in their call for change. As he spoke, he thought about Jamal, sitting at home watching the news coverage. He hoped his son would see this moment as proof that standing up for yourself didn't mean fighting alone. Sometimes it meant finding strength in community. While Marcus embraced his role as an advocate, Officer Grayson's world was unraveling. The internal affairs investigation moved swiftly, fueled by mounting public pressure. Witnesses came forward, recounting past encounters with Grayson that mirrored the incident with Marcus. A young woman described how Grayson had stopped her late one night, accusing her of prostitution without evidence. An elderly man recounted being shoved against a wall during a routine traffic stop, simply because he questioned why he'd been pulled over. Each testimony painted a damning picture of an officer who abused his authority and targeted marginalized communities. Grayson, once confident in his ability to evade consequences, now found himself isolated. His colleagues avoided him in the hallways, unwilling to risk association with someone under such intense scrutiny. Even his superiors distanced themselves, issuing vague statements about zero tolerance for misconduct while preparing for the inevitable fallout. When the investigators finally sat down with Grayson for a formal interview, he struggled to defend his actions. Every explanation he offered sounded hollow, every justification weak. By the end of the meeting, it was clear. His career was hanging by a thread. Chief Martinez called an emergency press conference to address the situation. Standing before a bankway of microphones and cameras, he looked visibly uncomfortable, a stark contrast to his usual authoritative demeanor. After a thorough review of the evidence, he announced, "Officer Daniel Grayson has been placed on administrative leave pending termination proceedings. His actions do not reflect the values of this department or the trust placed in us by the community." The announcement sent shockwaves through the city. Some praised the decision as a step toward accountability, while others argued it didn't go far enough. Protesters demanded more than just firing one officer. They wanted systemic changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. Community. Leaders proposed measures like mandatory anti-racism training, increased transparency in disciplinary actions, and the establishment of civilian oversight boards to hold officers accountable. For Marcus, the news brought a mixture of relief and frustration. On one hand, he was glad to see Grayson facing consequences for his behavior. On the other hand, he knew this was only the beginning of a much larger fight. Firing one officer wouldn't erase decades of mistrust between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Real change required sustained effort, commitment, and collaboration. Determined to keep the momentum going, Marcus joined forces with local activists to draft a list of demands for city officials. They organized town halls inviting residents to share their experiences and brainstorm solutions. Slowly but surely, progress began to take shape. One breakthrough came when the mayor announced plans to implement body cameras for all officers, ensuring that interactions with civilians were recorded and accessible to the public. Another victory came when the city council approved funding for a new civilian oversight board, tasked with reviewing complaints against police officers. These victories were small compared to the broader issues at play, but they represented tangible steps forward. Throughout it all, Marcus leaned heavily on his support system, his son, his friends, and the growing network of advocates he'd connected with. Jamal, though young, understood the significance of what his father was doing. One evening, as they sat together eating dinner, Jamal looked up and said, "Dad, you're like a superhero." Marcus chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. Not a superhero, buddy, just someone trying to make things better for everyone. Weeks turned into months. Marcus's resolve only grew stronger. He started attending workshops on leadership and advocacy, learning how to navigate the complexities of policy reform and grassroots organizing. He collaborated with journalists like Sarah Collins, whose reporting had played a pivotal role in bringing attention to his case. Together, they worked to amplify stories of resilience and resistance, highlighting the voices of those often overlooked in mainstream narratives. Despite the challenges, there were moments of hope that reminded Marcus why he kept pushing forward. At a community event celebrating recent victories, a young girl approached him shyly, clutching a drawing she'd made. In bright colors, it depicted Marcus standing tall, surrounded by a crowd of cheering supporters. "Thank you for being brave," she whispered before running back to her parents. Marcus stared at the picture, feeling a lump rise in his throat. This was why he fought, not for recognition or revenge, but for the next generation. For kids like Jamal and this little girl, who deserved to grow up in a world where fairness and dignity weren't privileges, but rights. By the time the dust settled, Marcus's life had changed in ways he never anticipated. He went from being a quiet, hard-working dad navigating the struggles of single parenthood to becoming a symbol of courage and perseverance. His story inspired others to speak out, to challenge injustice, and to believe that even the smallest acts of defiance could spark meaningful change. And though the road ahead remained long and uncertain, Marcus walked it with renewed purpose, knowing he wasn't alone. Change might be slow, but it was possible, and he intended to be part of it every step of the way. The final chapter of Marcus Thompson's journey was not marked by a single moment, but rather by a series of milestones that collectively signaled progress. The firing of Officer Daniel Grayson, while significant, was just the beginning of a much larger transformation, one that rippled through the community and beyond. For Marcus, it became clear that his role in this movement wasn't temporary. It was something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. In the weeks following Grayson's dismissal, the city took bold steps toward reform. Chief Martinez announced sweeping changes within the police department, including mandatory anti-racism training for all officers. These sessions weren't just about lectures or PowerPoint presentations. They were interactive workshops designed to foster empathy, accountability, and understanding. Community members were invited to participate, sharing their personal stories and offering feedback on how law enforcement could rebuild trust. Marcus attended one of these workshops, sitting alongside officers who had once seemed untouchable. At first, the tension in the room was palpable, but as conversations unfolded, walls began to crumble. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Another major victory came when the City Council approved funding for a civilian oversight board, a long-awaited demand from activists. This board consisted of local residents, legal experts, and social justice advocates tasked with reviewing complaints against police officers. Its creation sent a powerful message. No one was above scrutiny, not even those sworn to protect and serve. Marcus played a key role in shaping the structure of the board, ensuring it had the authority and resources needed to make meaningful decisions. When the first meeting convened, he stood outside the building watching as citizens filed in, ready to hold their leaders accountable. For Marcus, however, the fight extended far beyond policy changes. He realized early on that true transformation required addressing deeper systemic issues rooted in history, education, and economic inequality. To tackle these challenges, he joined a grassroots organization called Voices Unite, which focused on empowering marginalized communities through advocacy, mentorship, and resource sharing. Through this group, Marcus connected with others who shared his vision for a more equitable society. Together, they organized food drives, job fairs, and educational seminars aimed at uplifting families like his own. One of the most impactful initiatives Marcus helped launch was a youth leadership program. Inspired by Jamal's curiosity and passion for fairness, he wanted to create opportunities for young people to learn about activism and civic engagement. The program brought together teenagers from diverse backgrounds, teaching them skills like public speaking, organizing protests, and navigating political systems. On the day of the program's launch, Marcus addressed the group, his voice filled with pride and hope. "You are the future," he told them, looking out at the eager faces before him. "What you do today will shape the world tomorrow. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to challenge what doesn't feel right, and to stand up for what matters. And remember, you're never too young to make a difference." The students responded, enthusiastically, asking thoughtful questions and sharing their own experiences with injustice. One girl, barely 16, recounted how her older brother had been unfairly targeted by police during a traffic stop. Another boy spoke about growing up in a neighborhood plagued by neglect and violence, yet still dreaming of becoming a lawyer to fight for change. Their courage moved Marcus deeply, reminding him why every effort mattered, even the smallest ones. As months turned into years, Marcus continued to balance his dual roles as a father and an advocate. Life didn't slow down. If anything, it became busier. Between working 2 jobs, attending meetings, and mentoring young activists, he rarely had time to rest. But despite the exhaustion, he felt fulfilled in a way he never had before. Each victory, no matter how small, fueled his determination to keep going. Whether it was seeing a new policy implemented or hearing a young person say they felt inspired by his story, Marcus found joy in knowing he was contributing to something bigger than himself. Jamal, now 10 years old, grew up watching his father transform into a leader. Though still a child, he understood the weight of what Marcus was doing. At school, Jamal proudly told his classmates about the rallies, the speeches, and the programs his dad had helped build. His teachers noticed a shift in him. He became more confident, more curious, and more willing to speak up when he saw something unfair. One afternoon, after returning home from soccer practice, Jamal handed Marcus a drawing he'd made in art class. It depicted a crowd of people holding signs that read justice and equality, with Marcus standing front and center. In big letters across the top, Jamal had written, "My dad changes the world." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he hugged his son tightly. "Thank you, buddy," he said softly. "But I'm not doing it alone. We're all changing the world, together." While Marcus celebrated victories, he also faced setbacks. Not everyone supported the reforms, and some pushed back fiercely. Critics accused activists of being divisive, claiming that efforts to hold police accountable undermined law enforcement entirely. Tensions flared at town hall meetings, where heated debates often erupted between supporters of reform and defenders of the status quo. Marcus learned quickly that progress came with resistance, and staying resilient meant finding strength in community. Sarah Collins remained a steadfast ally throughout the journey. Her reporting on Marcus's case evolved into a broader investigation of policing practices across the country. She published articles, gave interviews, and even co-authored a book detailing the stories of individuals impacted by systemic racism. Together, she and Marcus traveled to conferences and panel discussions, amplifying their message on national platforms. Their partnership proved invaluable, blending Marcus's lived experience with Sarah's journalistic expertise to create a narrative that resonated widely. By the 5th anniversary of the incident, the city looked different, not perfect, but undeniably changed. Crime rates had decreased thanks to improved community police relations, and surveys showed a steady increase in public trust toward law enforcement. Schools incorporated lessons on racial equity into their curriculums, and businesses prioritized hiring practices that promoted diversity. None of these achievements happened overnight, but each represented a step forward, a testament to the power of persistence. On the anniversary itself, Marcus stood at the same bus stop where everything had begun. The streetlights flickered on, as dusk settled over the city, casting a warm glow on the sidewalk. He carried a single grocery bag this time, filled with fresh produce and a small cake for Jamal. As he waited for the bus, he reflected on how far he'd come since that fateful night. The fear and anger he'd felt then still lingered somewhere deep inside, but they no longer defined him. Instead, he chose to focus on the possibilities ahead, the lives touched, the barriers broken, and the seeds of change planted. A young woman approached him hesitantly, her hands clutching a notebook. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Thompson?" she asked shyly. When he nodded, she broke into a wide smile. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story gave me hope when I needed it most. I'm studying to become a civil rights lawyer because of you." Marcus smiled back, feeling a swell of gratitude. "That means so much to hear," he replied. "Keep fighting for what's right. We need people like you." As the bus pulled up and Marcus boarded, he glanced out the window at the bustling streets below. The city was alive with energy, its heartbeat stronger than ever. He thought about all the people who had joined him on this journey, the activists, the allies, the everyday citizens who refused to stay silent. They reminded him that change wasn't the work of one person, it was the collective effort of many. When Marcus arrived home, Jamal greeted him at the door with a grin. "Dinner smells amazing," he exclaimed, peeking into the grocery bag. "Can we eat now?" Laughing, Marcus ruffled his son's hair. "Of course, buddy. Let's dig in." As they sat together at the kitchen table, sharing a meal and talking about their day, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, he believed in the possibility of a better tomorrow, not just for himself and Jamal, but for everyone. And that belief, he realized, was the greatest victory of all.